Hey, LarkenRose here. We're going to have some dramatic readings by Amanda from pieces from the Jones Plantation novel, and then I'm going to add a little bit of elaboration and stuff afterwards. So here goes the first one of them.
This is Mr. Smith speaking. Mr. Jones, the average man is so weak-minded that if he thinks that everyone else holds a certain belief, he will adopt that belief himself, just to fit in. Or, at the very least, he will say that he holds that belief to avoid the scorn of others. So, if you just tell them that they all believe something, then they will all believe it? Jones asked incredulously. Essentially, Smith replied casually. If each one believes that all the others don't want the workers armed, for example, then most of them will choose to believe that too. Okay, but there's no way that would work on all of them. You might be surprised. Very few have the mental fortitude to form an opinion separate from what they think the crowd believes, and the crowd itself will usually chastise those few into silence. Mr. Smith watched the python glide through his hands. Unlike my little friend here, the human animal is a pack animal. The average individual, knowing how much he needs the help and cooperation of others, will do whatever he can to keep in their good graces, and will go to great lengths to receive the friendship and approval of others. He will temper what he says and what he does. He will hide who he is, and hide what he really believes, or even more amazingly, he will actually change what he really and truly believes, just so he can fit in and continue to enjoy the comfort and safety of the pack. And he will be completely unaware that that has even occurred. He will continue to imagine that his thoughts are his own, and that his beliefs were freely chosen.
So people tend to imagine that their belief systems are the result of them, carefully and objectively analyzing ideas they hear, and that's true of almost nobody ever. And that's just sort of a description of how the human mind works. For those of us who have gone against things that we were surrounded by and taught, most of us noticed how difficult it is to pull away from the whole peer pressure thing, because like Mr. Smith explained, the fact that people are pack animals makes there be a punishment for being different than the pack. So people will do things to fit in, and that's still sort of it's in our very nature, even when we imagine that we actually think about things and all that. So fabricating public opinion, like Mr. Smith talks about in the novel, Jones Plantation, is something that's very effective, and it's why governments do it all the time. And you can see it in the formerly mainstream media, formerly because now they're dwarfed by, just random people like Joe Rogan and Russell Brand, who have way bigger audiences than CNN, which is hysterical. But their main purpose was basically to tell the subject class what they believe. Not tell them what they should believe, well, that too, but tell them what they believe. And so the message in I'll refer to them as legacy media, Russell Brand uses that term, like the old-fashioned, worthless propaganda wing of the ruling class that pretends to be reporters. What they do is convey the message that all, dignified, educated, decent people are basically commies and leftists and all that. They're not trying to lay out a rational argument for it, because they know that's not all that effective on most people. And what is effective is just telling people what they believe. And most people not only will be pushed along by that, but even if they disagree, they're going to self-censor. Because if they think they're surrounded by a bunch of people who don't agree with them, they don't want, for the most part, the repercussions of people disagreeing and calling them silly and calling them ridiculous. So the peer pressure thing is really obvious, and the ultimate irony is that those in power pretend to be against that and just obviously use it. Like the last several years and the abomination that was with pushing power for the ruling class and money for big pharma based on absolute lies and shaming and peer pressure and just absolute bullshit, just making stuff up that isn't even remotely close to true. Look how many people not only believed that, because, well, everybody on the news is saying we should be scared out of our minds of this thing, but look how many of them with zero foundational knowledge of the subject and zero reason to believe any of it other than, well, it sounds like everyone thinks this, which everyone didn't, but the media made it sound that way. Look how many of them didn't just fall for it, but hated anybody who didn't. And that's one of the most powerful things of peer pressure, is if you can make a bunch of people in a group feel like they're enlightened and informed because they follow the crowd, because they believe what everybody else believes, then they will like hate on and condemn, and sometimes all the way like, well, if you didn't get a mask, I hope you die. And if you didn't get stabbed, I hope horrible things happen to you. Coming from people who don't understand anything about anything and had no curiosity and no skepticism. It's not like they did research and looked at the numbers and said, oh, okay, yeah, this is really a good thing. Everybody should do this. There was none of that, because that approach only works on the tiny minority of people who actually think about things. And in that case, they couldn't do that with the people who think about things, because the people who think about things could look at the numbers and go, masks have never worked. We have studies going back to the 1950s. That almost everything they were saying about how do we deal with this thing was a bald-faced lie that almost anybody with any level of understanding in virology or immunology, and that's if you accept the mainstream version of how those things work, those people all knew it was a lie, and they didn't dare to speak up either, even though they were the ones who actually know enough to know, like, they're just pretending that everybody has to get stabbed for immunity to happen. And even in the conventional version of how that stuff works, that's not at all true. That's never been true. And look how many professionals and people who almost deserve the label experts didn't dare to say a word because of peer pressure. And bullying and condemnation and sometimes just direct retaliation of, we're going to ruin your careers and call you all sorts of names and get you canceled and blah, 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 blah. So you had a perfect spectrum of the result of peer pressure, with a massive number of complete ignoramuses suddenly imagining that they're the scientific responsible ones when they never took 5 seconds to understand anything. And then a few people who should have known better and didn't dare to speak up because of that same peer pressure. Now, the last few years makes a glaring example of that, but it's certainly not unique. They do this about literally everything, like the gun control thing. And that's actually what the mention in the Jones Plantation, this isn't really a spoiler. At one point, Smith basically says, most of you have all agreed that normal people being armed would just lead to trouble, so we'll keep the guns in the hands of our protectors of the Jimmy Jack and Shane and them. Trying to fabricate the thing of, well, unless you want children to die, then obviously you'd be in favor of disarming the rabble. And they do that instead of like statistics and explanations or principles, because none of those are ever on their side. And tyrants know that, and so they know how to use peer pressure. And the saddest thing is that this method uses people's goodness plus their ignorance against them and makes them into agents of evil. A hell of a lot of people who thought they were doing the right thing in the last few years became agents of evil. They were propagandists of evil. They were bullies for evil. They were helping a malicious ruling class to destroy so many aspects of society, and they felt good about it. And that is the power of being able to fabricate public opinion and make people think, yes, I'm the enlightened, learned, responsible, compassionate. No, you're not. You're a gullible idiot with no mental fortitude to actually figure things out on your own and then stick to that instead of letting the crowd push you around or the propagandists push you around. And it's pathetic to watch, but it's a very real aspect of human nature. So there's a brief version of that in the movie, and there's a longer version in the Jones Plantation novel. But I had to put that in because that is one of the most powerful weapons of tyrants, is duping people's goodness and responsibility into being fuel for evil by way of people's ignorance, because they don't know any better. But if they're told, you're the good people because you're staying at home and you're wearing your masks and you're getting jabbed with something you don't nearly understand and don't know anything about, and you're going along with all these commands, and that makes you good and compassionate and caring, and anybody who didn't do that is just evil and wants grandma to die. And the fact that we have such a glaring example of that, I hope, now the vast majority of people aren't going to say it out loud, but I hope that a huge percentage of the people who fell for that and did that and enabled evil as a result of their gullibility and ignorance, I hope they feel shame and guilt, because they should. They were agents of evil, and now so much of the truth is coming out piece by piece to show them they were absolutely wrong the whole stinking time. Will they learn their lesson? Probably not. Should they be bludgeoned over the head with the fact that they enabled evil as a result of their misguided ignorance, combined with their good intentions and not knowing anything? Probably. Because ironically, the one way in which peer pressure and bullying is good is if somebody's doing something bad and destructive, all the other people should say, you suck. Stop doing that. So I'd like to say to the vast majority of people who went along with that fear-mongering and hated anyone who didn't, you suck. Stop doing that.
See the description below for a book deal. You can get a signed copy of The Most Dangerous Superstition and a signed copy of the Jones Plantation novel for only $40, shipped to anywhere in the U.S. and nowhere outside the U.S., because heck with foreigners. Whoops, sorry. It's just too much of a pain in the ass right now. Yeah.